Good evening. I'm John Bailey. This is People to be Heard, the program where people who have something to say have their say. Tonight, you've got Michael Witt of White Plains, New York, USA, who is an English language specialist tackling a growing need in our society, teaching English to adults and teenagers. Mike is a teacher of English for Global LT and
Cardis.
Cardis, right. And he serves international clients and who come to the States with their employers or with their families from employers. And we wanted to ask you, Mike, how did you become aware of the growing need for English and cultural education population?
Well, just to start off, I switched into this career a few years ago. I was a marketing rep. And I was more interested, frankly, in teaching and helping people as opposed to selling a product. So when I got my certification for teaching English as a second language, I looked at the opportunities that were available. And I found that there were many companies that were interested in hiring people to work on an individual basis, or not many, some companies I could say, to help them, develop their language skills. People who are well educated in their own language, often well traveled, and may even know a few languages, but they just need to, not just the language acclimation, but the cultural acclimation of how things are done in the States.
Fitting in.
Yes.
Yes, fitting in. Now, what made you decide to go into teaching language?
Some of the most interesting jobs I had in marketing were working for companies that were arts-related companies. I worked for film distribution companies, and we were distributing foreign films to people. And I always liked the idea of different cultures and doing different things like that. And I like the way I'm an avid reader. I like reading. I like the way language sounds. I picked up on my own a fair amount of Spanish just working with people, plus what I did, which I use often in my for the Hispanic population I work with. And it just seemed like an interesting sort of second career to do, something different, something that was a change and a very useful thing to do.
Right. Is this population of adults and teens coming to the country legally, growing and have a need for this type of specialized, I'd say more sophisticated service?
Well, for the companies I'm working for currently, these are fairly well-to-do people and fairly successful in their own right. They often will work for international companies. So they're not people who are trying to get a visa to get in. They're already in. They're already here, at least temporarily. And the idea is just for them to maybe be more functioning in the workplace. In many cases, you might have a husband that's working well, but the wife doesn't have quite the same comfort level or expertise as the husband, for example, and might want to go out and work. Or it could be the other way around, where the wife is working and the husband wants to get out and work, or just be more comfortable working with their kids. There's all sorts of reasons why it happens.
All right. Do you feel this is applicable to persons that are here and they have children going to the American school systems, but they themselves don't speak English much at all, and the kids wind up having to teach their parents English?
Yeah. Well, these kind of training programs can deal with any level.
I see.
So you don't have to. I mean, they have testing which can go from beginners, who really where you're just kind of getting them. In fact, I worked with somebody who was kind of an advanced beginner, and I was just getting him comfortable giving out directions on how to drive his car from, say, his apartment to the town. Which are more.
How basic.
What?
How basic.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like when I go to a foreign country, I'm really at sea. I usually go with tours that are managed, but so.
Yeah, it depends on the.
They have no one to guide them that way.
The one place where I think sometimes you can go to public libraries and even community colleges. They will have some free programs. For this particular population, they're not servicing them. A lot of the public program, particularly the nonprofits, will tend to service some of the immigrants that are coming in that are really disadvantaged.
I
And
see.
really, you know, even those programs are lacking, frankly, in this current climate.
All right. Mike Wallace question. Do you think they're doing a good job, these nonprofits, giving the immigrants what they need, speech-wise?
Depends on which ones you go to. I think the libraries and the community colleges, if they're going, are the best places. I would be very leery about particularly the for-profit places. A lot of them, I think, are just trying to make money off of people and don't care if the students learn English. And some of the students that are going in are just signing up for classes to get their visas. So there is stuff out there that you have to. It's not a well-monitored field, so there are, I wouldn't say so much the nonprofits, but some of these for-profits that you see advertised aren't all above board.
Yeah. What do you think of the recorded programs and lessons that you can buy? Or do they work? I tried a couple, and I couldn't concentrate on it.
I think they only ask, I mean, you're listening and speaking, but you're not really doing the full gamut. From what I know, I honestly haven't tried too many of them, so I don't want to, I don't want to say whether they do or don't work. I know listening is a very important part of learning. I often will go and play YouTube videos and have them repeat things, so that aspect of it can work. But there's 4 basic components when you're doing this. You have to develop not just listening and speaking, reading and writing, and you have to sometimes see something as well as hear it.
Right, it's a
visual.
There's an academic word for a holistic approach.
Yeah, that's holistic, and if you're, it's better to sort of visually see what you're doing as well as just hearing something. Then you're just dealing with the auditory thing.
Absolutely, it's like when you're learning to referee a sport, which I do. You have to make a call wrong 3 times before you really begin to recognize it.
Yeah, and especially if you're dealing with somebody who's on like a more beginner level of learning, they need to see the photos with it and then kind of identify it. A lot of learning actually comes not just by hearing something, but you can look at a picture and do a description of it. Depending on the level of speaker, an advanced speaker could talk for like 10 minutes and do a whole paragraph or 2 if they know English fairly well, and you might just have to tweak a few things. Someone who's new, you just look at simple things where it's just, this is a dog, this is a cat, but it can go beyond that depending on how much they know.
Yeah, do you handle group classes or just mainly individual?
I've done group classes for some nonprofits and things like that. I like doing individuals. I find it a bit more relaxing personally. You can kind of tailor it to the person. You don't have to worry. It's a different sort of mentality. With an individual, I find myself more of a coach. You're there and you can work with them and do that. With a group, especially if it's a larger group and they're not, and everybody has different needs, you have to be a bit more of a general. Now, some people really love being a general. There's some teachers who've been doing this much longer than me who love the classroom experience. They love being able to divide people into group, and there's the advantage of having in a classroom the students
highly needy, doing well, and average, and then teaching.
Yeah, and they help each other. That's the advantage of a classroom. You can put the stronger students with the weaker ones, and they can learn with each other.
Do companies pay for this program?
Yeah, basically, the companies I'm working for, we get hired as contractors.
Yes.
So you get, let's say, a flat fee or whatever it may be. It could be 30 or 50, whatever an hour it may be, depending on your expertise. And you'll get billed out for 100 hours, let's say, to work with a person, and then you kind of, first of all, they'll do a little bit of an initial assessment, but then you have to go with them and sort of test them and kind of figure out what they know, and then through the process of it, you ask them what areas, how they like to learn. So there's 3 basic things. First of all, what do they want to really learn? What they like to, how they like learning. And what they feel comfortable with, how much they know. It's really more actually 2 things: how much they know and what do they want to learn, and how do they like learning.
Supposedly, the schools do this with their new intakes coming in every year that don't speak English, and I was wondering if you know of any schools that use your organization's services.
I'm not sure that they're really used by school. They're really used more just, these
By
organizations
companies,
really just deal with families coming in. I don't, as far as I know, there are some times where you could work and combine a couple of families together and do a group of 2 or 3 people, but it's not formal like a classroom thing, at least these particular groups.
Well, here you got a massive problem with English speaking in this county, Westchester County. Massive problem. Their test scores are not really worth reporting. They're so bad. And yet you have an organization that seems to have a technique that can tailor things. And I have to ask the school district this, because how good can they be? You know, if they're not using all the resources, you know? But that's just my personal opinion. What do you feel the schools are doing right with the younger?
Well, I'll say what my experiences was at WCC and what they're doing more with it. Because to be honest, most of my
Westchester County Community College.
Yeah, Westchester Community College. That's a very highly regarded community college. And I know for a fact there are people I've met there who are adult learners who've gone there and not known much and gone through the levels. And if they do it right, after about 2 or 3 years, they're usually, the idea is that if you're really doing it right, you can get a person who doesn't speak well at all to somebody who's speaking in 2 years.
At the adult level.
At the adult level.
Which is harder to learn when you're adult, right?
They say that for the most part. I think a lot, but there's
you
other...
don't think that's true, based on your experience?
There's other factors that go into it, too. I mean, there's factors...
The lazy factor.
Not the lazy fact. I wouldn't call it the lazy fact.
Lazy. Okay.
Nah, I don't know. I haven't seen...
Okay, and so you go ahead.
I think most of the learning comes from how much exposure they give themselves to the target language. If they stay, probably, I think one of the biggest handicaps, honestly, with some of the people not learning may not be the system, is that they kind of stay with people who are speaking their own language. They don't branch out and go to areas where they, and that's really what the individual has to be responsible to do.
That is fascinating. You're absolutely right. Because that is what has happened. The polarization, groups stay within their group.
Yeah.
And so the answer then, as you see it, is program really putting them out into the community, into practical situations, and putting them right into the soup.
Yeah, give them or just give them a chance to speak. I mean, the ideal is, and unfortunately a lot of teachers don't do that, is if you're really teaching a class full of, say, 15 people English, you're the English teacher. There's a couple of myths about it. First of all, believe it or not, it's an advantage if the class is not just, say, all Russian or all Chinese or all Hispanic. The more mixed, the better, because that forces them to speak English. They can't go back and start like speaking Chinese to if they're in a group of 3 people and the other people are or you know, Russian.
That is so true.
And the worst classes are the ones where they all speak the same native language.
Which is like the way they handle the Spanish learners when they come into school districts.
I suppose,
I don't know if that's true in White Plains. I mean, I've never really delved into it.
But that's generically when I've seen adults, that's what you have to do. Get them to speak it and get the teacher to give them exercises where the teacher isn't talking much. All you need to do is say, look, this is how you do something. This is what you're supposed to do. Go do it.
Yeah, I have horrible memories of the old French language labs I had in high school, which were horrible. It was so antiseptic, and I didn't do well in those.
And I think another thing that teachers need to do is make it fun. You know, that it doesn't have to be dry. I actually came up, one of the most fun sort of things I did, I used a Bugs Bunny cartoon to teach them how to recognize sounds. This was great. They had to listen to like Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, and Elmer Fudd and recognize which one had a speech impediment and which ones didn't. You can't do that with a beginner, but if they know English to a certain point, and they have fun with it.
Those cartoons were really sophisticated.
Yeah.
Because adults enjoy them because they see the higher level of humor that they were approaching. So do kids. How can the um, how can the older population of English towns adults be helped to progress in their roles in the community, advancement in their careers through such programs as yours, the individual instruction?
I think a lot of times what they really need to do, first of all, is a lot of it isn't just learning the words, it's learning the context of the words. I mean, for example, there's a French couple I'm working with the teenage sons. They know English pretty fluently, but they speak what's called British English, which I didn't realize how different British English is than American English till I really started doing this. People from Europe will say, we're going on holiday. We're going to, my son went to university. We'll stop at past. If they say that to Americans, Americans might get confused. So they need to sort of, that's just basic word things, but just also that there are ways of doing things that are different. Get practice using, a lot of times I think one of the best things they can do is just for fun, practice idioms, things. One of the most interesting things, when this was something I now incorporate in a lot of my individual instructions, is you can get a person that's very sharp and could understand everything we're saying right now, might even be able to know a word like esoteric, but you say something like, oh, you're paying your dues by starting at the bottom of this company, they'll give you a blank look.
Yes, it's the...
and those are just common ways that Americans speak, and they have to kind of get...
It's American.
Yeah, and so it's getting used to American culture. Even things like, I had one class I was doing, this is when I was doing some classes, where Thanksgiving was coming up, and there were about half a dozen Asian students in this class. They didn't know what Thanksgiving was, other than people ate turkey. If you can sort of give them a way to sort of understand what American holidays are, what Martin Luther King Day is, I've done things with that. This way they feel more comfortable being here, so they can go to a social situation.
Now, is this need growing again? Are more people coming to the States that, with corporations that require this sort of immersion?
I would say there's a twofold thing. It's not just sort of because they're coming here. It's because English in general has become the lingua franca of the world. I think next to Mandarin, English is the most spoken language on the planet right now. And it's not that they're not mostly native speakers. They're people who are speaking it as their second or possibly their third language, because it's become the language that people use in the business community. It's become a cultural language. U.S., for better or worse, American culture has a big influence. So it's more that they just kind of do it just to sort of get, it's more that you could go in a lot of places in Europe, and if you don't know, for example, Finnish or Swedish, in those cultures they know English very well.
So, do you like teaching this
I have fun.
type of a course?
Well, let me sort of put it to you this way. It's not the easiest thing to get to work, but when you get something that works, it's really great.
So you've been perfecting your technique over the last 5 years.
Yeah, I'm relatively new at it. I mean, there's people who I work with who have been doing it 20 and 30 years, and it still has its ups and downs.
Well, isn't it basically on the individual? You really have to adjust yourself.
To some extent, but there's also things that that kind of work universally. It's more just it is on the individual. You have to understand what they're weak, what they feel comfortable with, and what they don't. I mean, there are some people, for example, who may not speak very well, but they can understand everything you're saying. There was this one Japanese girl who could write an essay almost as well as any American I had, but if she couldn't understand when it was spoken to her, and her pronunciation was, well, the Asians have a much tougher time with pronunciation than other cultures anyway, because it's just everything. English is very different than most Asian languages, from what I gather, in terms of pronunciation. So there's things like that you have to work through.
What is the largest nationality or group that you teach?
Most of the experience I've had is mostly, I would say, first Hispanic, then afterwards Asians. I mean, with these companies, it's a little different. I'm talking about when I've gone to like some of the for-profit schools, there were the lower levels, they tended to be more Hispanic. The higher levels, there would be Asians, but you'd also get some people mixed in from Africa, A lot of some Arabics I've had. Right now, individually, I'm working with an Egyptian and some French people, and I've worked with a Brazilian and a
How fascinating.
and an Argentinian. Right now, I'm trying to add to my repertoire. Anybody know any Asians or Russians out there? That's what that's the next group I want to go with.
Well, suppose schools wanted to explore, like, take a really hard case class, and how would they contact your company? Well, it's not your company. You are basically someone who works for. You work for Global LT and
Cardis,
and Cardis. Now, how does it work? Do they consider how much does it cost the school district to do this, or a company?
You know, honestly, it's not done through a school district.
Yeah.
It's done through a corporation. So it's. I don't think it's really.
I can't imagine they wouldn't want to explore the school market.
I haven't even thought of mentioning.
Well, the school market doesn't want to hear from it.
Yeah.
But they are not doing the job. They just aren't. The numbers show it. All across Westchester County, and this is supposedly the most educated county in the United States.
That's an interesting point of view, and honestly, it could be something I could bring up to my supervisors and see if they would want to do that.
It's a marketing opportunity that could help a lot of people faster, and that's just my personal opinion, because I've watched the scores for 15 years, and they haven't improved. In fact, they're worse, even with the easier tests.
Oh, you're talking about people specifically
Assessing,
coming in from the country trying to learn the language?
Yes, right. I mean, the major problem with performance, remember the achievement gap years ago? And we had narrowed that to 10%. Well, the achievement gap is now infinitesimal with the new tests. Infinitesimal. Districts in Westchester County have not been doing the job.
Right.
And that's all. That's any rational person will tell you that, just like we can. But I digress. And but I think that's an important issue. If they have hit upon a way to teach English better to adults, and also teach English better to students through more individualized instruction by experts, the school district has to start thinking about that. My goodness, they do IEP plans.
Yeah, and also,
what do you think? Is that a possible model? I don't know.
Well, there is a place I've interviewed with recently that's not for ESL, but has been doing that in another context, Sylvan Learning Center. They basically will, and they deal with, K through 12, but they do a lot of, it's fresh in my mind because I just interviewed with them the other day to find out what they're about. They'll do things like go to the schools and find out students who need study skills. And these are students that they're not quite at the learning disabled level, but they're not quite getting where they could be. They might be performing at a C level instead of where they're capable of performing at a B+ level, and they're performing at a C+ level. So they'll go and they'll have like certain programs where they'll have one student or a group of students and teach them math skills or teach them things like that. And possibly you could expand, a company like this could do the same thing with language learning, have them, you could even have a specific class on just learning reading comprehension skills in another language. You could have discussion classes. A lot of classes are just basically, you get a bunch of people together for an hour and they just have to talk in English and you give them a topic. And it's like you sink or swim. And when you hear them, in fact, when I work with my Egyptian woman, that's what she wants to do. We were talking about taking vacations.
Well, how long, you mentioned earlier the program, that it would take 2 to 3 years.
At a community college, that's what they say. It should take about, ideally, if you're
adult
English, ideally you could do it in about 2 years, maybe. Yeah,
right.
if the student really puts in the work and is really, and the teacher knows what they're
the younger
doing.
they are.
Usually.
Yeah, fine. So it would seem that rather that you could do this with these Spanish-speaking parents who could help their children more if they didn't have 3 jobs. But I mean, I'm just thinking ways they have to tackle the problem better than they've been doing. It's just not working. So, but now, let's see. We're coming down to the last minutes of the show, and I wanted to know what you would like parents of younger children and teenagers who would like their teenagers to learn more English and be, what can you say to them as to how they can help them?
Well, one thing they need to do is sort of be patient with the kids in some kids. With what I've seen, it's not, even though they're younger and all that, you have to sort of allow them to sort of accept where they're at now, where you'd like them to be. You know, and that's I think just generally
That's touching you say that.
You know, and then once they can accept where they're at, just give them fun things to do, where they can practice and find like a bunch of peers. Maybe find like groups where you can kind of socialize with people. You know, there's one thing I was thinking of doing for some of the teenagers I've worked with. There's a program at the Jacob Burns Center, which is where we met. Wonderful place, by the way.
Yes.
Where they have teaching programs for adolescents and just making film. Now, if you get a foreign student who's, let's say, interested in film and wants to socialize with Americans, put them in the class with the Americans.
Definitely.
Yeah, let them go in there. I mean, and you know, and with the kids, try not to get them too self-conscious. The problem with kids can be shaming. If they hear an accent, they may make fun of that. But just concentrate on just simple things. Make sure they're at least understood in the new language.
Now, down to the last minute, is there anything you personally would like to say about your profession, you know, and your mission?
Or my specific mission?
Yes, yes, right.
Well, like I said, what I'd really like to do is go out and find people who really want to get more aware of American culture and American language and get more functionals. What my mission is to find either those groups or those people, offer my services to them, and see how I can be like a guide to sort of get them to a place where they feel that America is a second home for them. Linguistically, knowledge of social skills, whatever they need to do just to sort of twist it.
So you're a social coach.
And holistically, and there's also sort of just the subtle ways of being with people. I mean, I like to kind of, but it's more, it's really just the language skills and just getting them to a point where they can feel. I mean, even with this Egyptian woman, she knows English quite well, but she just doesn't feel confident in it. Sometimes it's really building their confidence to say, look, I understand everything you're saying.
Confidence is everything.
Or confidence, not competence, but confidence.
Confidence, not arrogance.
Yeah, just
exactly. Well, Mike Witt, you have been heard. Thank you.
Thank
for
you very much.
highlighting this growing need in our workforce, the non-English speaking older immigrant coming to America with their employers. John Bailey, where people to be heard. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.